The ascension of Vladimir Putin, a former lieutenant colonel of the KGB, to the presidency of Russia in 1999 was a strong signal that the country was headed away from democracy. In the intervening years, Putin has grown not only into a dictator, but an international threat. But for too long, the US and the world's other leading powers have continued to appease him. Now it's clear that Putin is at the center of a worldwide assault on political liberty and the modern world order. But will the Western allies mobilize too late to halt the rise of the authoritarians? Welcome to Silicon Curtain. Please like, subscribe, and definitely add a comment to the videos. It really does help people to discover the fantastic speakers that we feature. Please also consider supporting the work we do by buying me a coffee or becoming a patron. We'll be adding exclusive content in there, such as chats and FAQs and translations from the best Russian language journalism. Garry Kasparov is a Russian pro-democracy leader, global human rights activist, business speaker and author, and former world chess champion. Born in Baku, Azerbaijan, in the Soviet Union in 1963, Garry Kasparov came to international fame at the age of 22 as the youngest world chess champion in history in 1985. He defended his title 5 times, including a legendary series of matches against arch-rival Anatoly Karpov. His famous matches against the IBM supercomputer Deep Blue in 1996 to 97 were key to bringing artificial intelligence and chess into the mainstream. In 2005, Kasparov retired from professional chess to join the vanguard of the Russian pro-democracy movement. In 2012, Kasparov was named chairman of the New York-based Human Rights Foundation, succeeding Vaclav Havel. He is now considered to be Russia's leading dissident. Well, Garry, I'm absolutely delighted that you can join the channel. I know the audience are going to be absolutely thrilled to hear your points of view as well. And as is usual on this channel, we are going to dispense with the simple questions that you might get on normal media. We're going to dive straight into some of the sort of deeper topics. Quite ironically, you have been arrested in absentia by a Russian court. Does this pose any threat to you at all?
I'm not so sure. It definitely doesn't affect my life in the United States. And since I have drastically reduced the list of countries I visit, so I don't expect any surprises in the airports of Warsaw, Bucharest, Tel Aviv, or Frankfurt. Um, in theory, yes, being on the terrorist list, arrested in absentia, and also, being tried on state prison. I mean, as the you could expect potentially some consequences, but we're at a time of war, so that's why frankly speaking, I don't care because I don't believe the regime is legitimate. And yeah, they hate me because I'm a soldier, very active soldier, maybe even a junior officer on the other side. Yeah, and for me, people on the other side, so Putin and his gang are the enemies. So whatever they say just doesn't change an inch my view of them or the situation. It's Let's say it's too late to be scared. Not that I haven't been scared, and I just think it shows that they pay attention to what we have been doing. Um, uh, it's not just me. Many of my colleagues already made to the list. Some of them already not just arrested, but also convicted in absentia. So that's why I'm in a good company. Yeah. And we always recall um, uh, famous saying of late Boris Nemtsov, one of the great Russian leaders, who used to repeat that at the time of authoritarianism, of just, at a time where you cannot validate your rating, your popularity by elections or by any other democratically measured instruments. The only way to recognize that you are not redundant and you're still relevant is the government's attacks on you. So if they step up with attacks, you're doing something right. Obviously, Boris received the highest reward from the government, bullet, which again proved his point. It's a tragic irony. He proved to be most relevant by being killed.
We'll come on to Navalny later, but similarly, I guess you could make that case. The state expended a huge amount of resource on poisoning him, imprisoning him, torturing him, whatever people may think of his politics. They certainly took him seriously. They expended a lot of resource to get him out of the way.
Yes, and they killed him. It's not accidental. I think it was also a statement because he was killed on the night of the 15th to the 16th of February. And it was the first day, this February 16th, the first day of the Munich Security Conference. And if we had any doubts, I think that's the moment of the announcement. For me, that was the best proof that it was intentional and it was a message. Because let's speculate that he died just from natural causes. Could have happened. He was not in great health, and sending him from middle of nowhere in Siberia to a penal colony beyond Arctic Circle. That was in winter. That was also, kind of a statement that he would not be coming back. But because it happened in such a place, so far away from any civilization, if they didn't want to steer this response on Munich Security Conference, they could have held this news secret for the next 3-4 days easily. No, they announced it just on almost at the opening of the conference. I remember we were sitting on one of the panels, and at one point everybody looked at the phone, his or her phone. So I think this is Putin's message to the West: basically, screw you. You think you can do something to me? I just killed. Well, he was there. He's irrelevant. No matter what you say, you wanted to save him. Big deal. I'm in charge. I can kill Ukrainians, I can kill Syrians, and I can kill Navalny. What can you do to me? And it's almost, I don't know, it's tragic that the response from the West was no response.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, I mean,
because
unfortunately, he's
Biden
right.
said
Yeah.
if there would be a catastrophic, or I don't know what he used, consequences for Russia if Navalny is killed in jail. And what's happened? Nothing. So for Putin, it was another way to prove the total impotence of the Western leadership. And unfortunately, it was right.
We're going to come on to that. That's going to be a big topic of this discussion, is why the West is behaving like this and what the sort of existential risks are that are being created. But let's stick with this sentence just for a moment. There's a pattern here. Putin labels his internal enemies. I'm sure he still considers you an internal as opposed to external enemy. He labels them as terrorists. All external enemies are labeled as Nazis, whether they be the Jewish president of Ukraine or whoever. There's a pattern here, isn't there? Anyone who disagrees with Putin, he is minded to destroy.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning that the Nazi term, the label, Nazi label, has not been picked up by accident. Because the very foundation of Soviet propaganda was built on the victory in World War II. And with every year, with every decade passing by, the mythology has been taking over. And I bet you that today, many Russians, even relatively educated Russians, may struggle saying who was fighting whom in this war. So whether America and Great Britain were allies, I'm not sure everybody remembers that, because it's all about Soviet Union defeating mighty Germany. And there were some maybe accidents, in Japan, America, all tiny things. The real battles were here. And of course, even the most educated Russians will not be able to tell you the role that American Lend-Lease played in helping Russia to survive in the first 2 years of war. And also the fact is that most of German warplanes were on the West throughout the entire war. So it's these such small details as Hitler taking away 400 experienced pilots with their planes in the midst of the Stalingrad battle to North Africa. Okay, there was no. It's the Soviet Union. We won. Come on, it's Soviet Union army has been destroyed in the first few months. Hitler's calculations were perfect with one minor defect: the United States of America. The same mistake that Kaiser Germany made. They just couldn't imagine the mighty United States. What the United States might, both economic and military, could actually add to the Allies. So America definitely saved Europe in 1918. Without American troops, the war would be probably over very quickly. Yeah, and the turning point of the World War II was December 11th, when Hitler made his gravest mistake, declaring war on the United States. Basically, saving FDR big trouble. How to get into the war, because at that point, all he could do is go against Japan, and that could, by the way, that if Hitler had some strategic, just made strategic calculations, all he needed is to wait for a few more months. And I know that there's evidence that no matter what Churchill said, in his memoirs, oh, we celebrated, he was pissing in his pants, because there was a real threat that America would move in opposite direction. And that's it was natural. Germany hasn't declared a war. Japan attacked. We have to do everything there. So it may end or dramatically reduce the Lend-Lease and also support for Britain and the Soviet Union. So Hitler basically just made the worst blunder one can imagine. So and it's going back to Russia's Nazis symbolism. Brezhnev, Soviet Union, created this myth, and year after year, the victory in Great Patriotic War, was justification for all shortcomings. We don't have enough food. We are not probably as advanced at the free world in some technology or just appliances, but we won the war. And Putin was riding this wave of this historic patriotism, and it turned into some kind of crazy megalomania. It's the idea was so opposite to Europe. Europe always said, America, never again. In the Soviet Union, in Putin's Russia, we can repeat it. So that's why when Putin looked for any plausible justification of his attack on Ukraine, he had to come up with Nazis, even despite the fact that he was facing a country led by a Jewish president. But Russian society now reached such a point of social and historic amnesia that it's Nazis and that's it. The fact is that Ukraine is, unlike Russia, is a vibrant democracy. It's simply being ignored. And of course, the rest of the world are Nazis who are supporting this, because Putin is fighting the free world, and it's all it's tipsy topsy. So they have to reverse the roles. Garry Kasparov is a terrorist, and some of my colleagues are thieves. Though we are being accused by terrorists and thieves, everybody knows that they are terrorists and thieves. And so that's the again perverted reality. I don't know. It's kind of the Kafkaesque world we live in. So I don't know whether it's sometimes I think it's the books. Neither Kafka nor Orwell nor Huxley could actually imagine that the world will reach this kind of craziness, this level of craziness, because the great writers of the past, they believe that, as we all believed at one point, that if information is available, abundance of information is the best guarantee against dictators. It seems that the dictators are far more sophisticated using modern technology to poison our brains, and brainwashing, now is reached a level that probably makes Dr. Goebbels pale from envy in his coffin.
And of course, I mean, it's been pointed out as well with figures like Trump, with figures like Putin and what's happening. I've heard people sort of joke that you don't need satire anymore because real life is more absurd than, any kind of satirist could dream up. But I think it's an interesting point as well, isn't it? You lived through this period of the relative freedom in the 90s, transitioning into the increasing authoritarianism in the 2000s. One of Putin's first acts when he took over the presidency was to destroy the independent TV networks and especially to shut down Kukli and shut the voice of Viktor Shenderovich and others. How is a regime like that, why is satire the first target? And then in your view, how did that slide towards authoritarianism? How did it take place?
Look, it's to be objective. So the Russia's slide to authoritarianism hasn't begun with Putin's appearance in Kremlin. The fact is, Putin's appearance in Kremlin was already a sign that Russia is moving in the wrong direction. Because under normal circumstances, you would not have a KGB operative, proud of his KGB origin, as he said himself, to be nominated and then elected, with, of course, the support of the powerful administrative machine built by Yeltsin to this position. I think we missed our historical chance. The window of opportunity was very, very, very short between 1991 and 93. But after Yeltsin resolved the crisis with the parliament by using tanks, I think Russia was definitely heading in the wrong direction. When people ask me, so what's the difference between Russia and Ukraine? I say, oh, Ukraine is part of Russia. And say, look, Ukraine is not a small country. It's actually the biggest European country. And it's not homogeneous. The Western Ukraine is different from Eastern Ukraine. And the South is also, it's probably closer to the East, but it's also different. But even with all the resemblance between people living in Eastern Ukraine and their counterparts on the other side of the border in West Russia, there was a historical point, and I think we can easily identify this, where these people who were born, let's talk about early 90s, born in the same country, Soviet Union, spoke the same language, not even special accent. It's not just traveling from London to York, so that you don't hear any difference. So you're trained, even the most trained ear will not see any difference whether the person speaks who speaks to you born in Kharkiv or in Belgorod. Again, divided by a couple of 100 miles, maybe even less. Read the same newspapers, same history books. So how come that they're fighting now just on different sides? And the answer to me is 1994. That was a turning point. In 1994, Boris Yeltsin, facing very dire prospects of re-elections, his rating was in freezing territory. He began a war in Chechnya. That's, little victorious war was always the best opportunity for would-be dictators to revive their rule. Yeltsin was not a dictator, but he didn't see any other chance. And of course, his family, everybody wanted him to stay. So they needed to boost some patriotic feelings. So that was already, the road to perdition. On the other side of the border, in Ukraine, they held elections. And the first Ukrainian president, Leonid Kravchuk, lost elections. And he walked away. Ukrainians experienced something which I think is, even in this country in America, I think people can hardly understand the importance of the moment. Though I think January 6th was a good indication. Peaceful transit of power. This is the most sensitive moment. And Ukrainians realized, we the people, we voted, he walked away. And the fact is that Kuchma was pro-Russian, Russia still had huge influence there, the corruption. people of Ukraine, and most of them, by the way, spoke Russian. 80% of Ukrainians probably spoke Russian. So that's as I was probably as a first language, definitely at that time. But they realized they were different because they could decide who would rule the country. And that's why when Putin tried in 2004 to force Yanukovych on them, Maidan. 2014, Maidan. So Ukrainians responded to any attempt to force them to accept any rule. And so here we are. So Ukraine is paying enormous price in blood. But while we understand there's not the same enthusiasm as 2 years ago, but they're still fighting. Ukrainian army, Ukrainian nation, and by the way, it's a nation now. Whether they're Russians, whether they're Ukrainians ethnically, whether they're Hungarians living in Ukraine, or Greeks, or Jews, or Muslims, they're all fighting for their country called Ukraine. And they're willing to pay this price. No other army in Europe would have sustained the Russian armada. Of course, it was not as great as we expected. So it's the true form of Russian army was far from being the second best army in the world. But there was still hundreds of thousands of troops, thousands of tanks, hundreds and hundreds of planes, missiles, and Ukraine is being bombarded. Just it's beyond imagination. So what's happening in Ukraine every day as we speak now, it's hard to describe. But the world, of course, is watching elsewhere. There are many tragedies elsewhere. Let's say Gaza. Yeah, I understand. But things that happening in Gaza is just, they are, I don't want to compare, this is the one human life against another, but it's not deliberate. So if Israel hits some of the targets, civilian targets, it's a mistake. And they apologize 10, 20 times. They have an investigation. Putin has been deliberately attacking civil infrastructure. Deliberately. It's not I'm saying, they say that. They are proud about it. They are not hiding their goal to destroy Ukrainians' infrastructure, energy, civil infrastructure, to make sure Ukrainians will not survive next winter. And there are many days in Ukraine, many nights actually, in Ukraine, where the amount of Russian explosives thrown on Ukraine is more than Israel threw on Gaza in 6 months. And of course, they're not, just the bombs or small missiles. Those are ballistic missiles. So this is the way Putin is conducting the war, and again, it's hard to imagine that you have on both sides of the front line you have people that some of them who are just over 40, born in the same country, and many of them still speak the same language because while Ukrainians are trying to resist speaking Russian, Russian is still, playing a major role for a simple reason. It's a working language for many Ukrainians, but it's a different nation now. While we all feel guilty for so many losses, but you can also feel proud for this spirit of humanity that cannot be broken even by the most vicious attacks by a Russian dictator.
And I think we'll come on to Western support because, of course, the losses on Ukraine's side are greater than they should have been. And we'll come on to that in a minute. I spoke to a former soldier on the channel earlier in the week. He said that we simply underestimate the scale of Ukraine's achievement. As you say, in 2014, they really didn't have much of an army at all. It had been looted, corruption was rife. They didn't have equipment and uniforms really to resist Russia's initial invasion of Donbass and Crimea. So what's happened between then and now is extraordinary. He said, just imagine, Ukraine in the last 2 years has destroyed the equivalent of 7 British armies in their entirety. So it's an extraordinary achievement of mastering Western weapons and techniques to really hold, as you say, what is a substantial Russian army at bay. But one of the real challenges, of course, there's been a period for 6 to 8 months where munitions was not provided because of an impasse in Congress in the US. But would you agree the problems go much deeper than this? There seems to be a lack of urgency. There seems to be a fear and caution in relation to Russia that has meant that Ukraine's hands have been tied in the way they fight. They have not been given the munitions that they needed when they needed them, even though it was in the capacity of Western allies to do that. How do you explain this?
Unfortunately, the explanation is as simple as tragic. Uh, when you fight the war, you have to decide what is the goal of this war. And for me, for Ukrainians also in this case, it was very simple. Ukraine must win. Um, Russian opposition, groups of Russian opposition, led by Michael Khodorkovsky and myself, we declared from the very beginning the key for Russian freedom, is in Sevastopol. The Ukrainian flag in Sevastopol, that will be the beginning of liberation of Russia from Putin's fascism. So, victory for Ukraine, freedom for Russia. That's our motto. Victory for Ukraine. Victory that includes full liberation of Ukrainian lands up to Sevastopol, reparations, and justice, to bring war criminals to justice. I didn't hear Western leaders repeating these three simple words: Ukraine must win. We will stand with Ukraine as long as it takes. Nonsense, because this sentence is very ambiguous, and you can end up with, for instance, we will stick with Ukraine as long as stand with Ukraine, as long as it takes for us to make a deal with Moscow, for instance. And no doubt that Biden administration has been negotiating with Russia before the war, during the war, and as we speak, they keep negotiating. They're trying to find the compromise because they don't understand. We are in the midst of the war it's a global war between freedom and tyranny. And this war, unlike chess, has no tie. There's no compromise. We win or we lose. And this is not just a war of Ukraine against Putin's invasion. It's a war conducted by Iranians, Chinese that still, just manipulating everything from behind the stage. You have Maduro, you have all the terrorists and Hezbollah, Hamas, Taliban. And we are losing this war, not because we have shortage of ammunition. This is not 1938, 1939. You say whatever you want about Chamberlain and Daladier, but they faced not Putin ragtags, they faced Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe. And the balance of power in 1938, 1939 was very questionable. You had Hitler, you had Stalin, who was not an ally, by the way, and he was more on Hitler's side. Japan, Italy, and America was neutral, isolationist. So today, the balance of power is very different. The free world, first time in history, has an overwhelming advantage, both militarily and economically. What we're missing? Political will. And also, again, Chamberlain and Daladier wanted to preserve peace, but not to make business deals with Hitler. Today, again, as we speak, the business continues because we're not at war. Putin is at war with us. Putin is at war with the free world. It's not Garry Kasparov saying, it's Putin has been saying that. This is the Russian concept. When people say, NATO is one step behind. No, I say, not one step. You are 2 wars behind because you are afraid of this World War III, being a result of massive Western support to Ukraine. Putin is already fighting World War IV. World War III was a Cold War that Soviet Union lost, and he's now trying to take a revenge, recognizing that he's too weak for confronting you directly, but it's a hybrid war. So he can influence your elections, he can buy your politicians, and he can demonstrate to all the dictators on the planet that his word is solid. Obama said in 2011, Assad must go. Where is Obama? I want to check. And Assad is still there because Putin said Assad must stay. That's a message. Recently, the dictator of Niger said, no Americans, no French. We stick with Russians and Chinese because they do not leave their friends behind. Now, what about America? 350,000 Afghans who worked with the United States have been left behind. The pictures from Kabul airport, I can bet you my bottom dollar that was the last proof Putin needed to make a decision to invade Ukraine. It was not in Vietnam. The last helicopter from the roof of American embassy in Saigon, again, it was tragic, but everyone knew the war was lost. Why on earth America ran away from this birded hoodlums with Kalashnikovs? It's weakness. And America projecting the world not what I used to see when I was a kid, strength and integrity, but today you see weakness and corruption. And of course, it emboldens bad guys. The whole idea of Obama that we'll walk away and it will be peace. No, no, no. You walk away, it's geopolitics. It's the rules of geopolitical physics. There's no vacuum. You walk away, somebody gets in. And I can tell you who is getting in. Putin, Xi Jinping, Taliban, Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran, Maduro. That's an outcome. We are on retreat, not because we are weak militarily or economically, we're much stronger, but because we are weak psychologically. We don't want to recognize it's a war. And Ukrainians demonstrated to us that it's a war. Though Ukraine has been already sacrificed at the very beginning, in just 3 weeks before the full-scale invasion, General Milley spoke on the Hill, testifying before the Congress. And he argued, following the report of Rand Corporation, very convincingly that giving Ukraine serious weapons, heavy weapons, would be a mistake because the Ukrainian army would collapse in a couple of weeks and these weapons would be left or will be seized by Russians. I found it quite sarcastic that these comments came from someone who was responsible for leaving American weapons worth of tens of billions of dollars in the hands of Taliban 6 months early. So what did America expect? Kyiv to fall in 4 days. That was a CIA assessment. They offered Zelensky not military assistance, but a helicopter to run away. So they didn't want to fight. And that's why when Ukraine survived the first onslaught, when the Battle of Kyiv was won, the free world was still trying to find a way to minimize the damage for globalization. What the heck? What globalization? It's a war. And there were definitely 2 moments where Ukraine could have won the war already. One was in September 2022. Russians, it was a panic, stampede. With enough weapons, Ukrainians could actually probably push Russians, just further, just on Kherson, just across the Dnieper River. Russia was in disarray. This delay gave Russia 8 months to build massive defenses. And then they expected Ukraine to go through its defenses with no air power. I mean, the entire NATO concept based on air power. They have been pondering Saddam Hussein for days and nights before they actually moved for American tanks. Ukraine had no air power. Russia had a dominant. It's just everything that Ukraine was forced to do is just to attack. It's against an enemy that had 8 months to build massive fortifications, dominance of the air power, and Ukraine even couldn't, use American weapons to hit Russian territory. America gave Ukraine 31 tanks. 31. Now, they sold to Morocco, I haven't checked, 100 or so just recently. This is the country that has, I checked, just maybe its internet is lying, but 12,000 tanks in reserve that are just doing nothing but collecting dust in the deserts of Arizona and California. Why do you need these weapons sitting in your storage? You spend more money to destroy these weapons. You have contractors, that are being paid to destroy the weapons. Why Ukraine is not being made contractor? That's an answer to your question about the Congress. Yeah, there's nothing good to say about MAGA Republicans that blocked it. But that $61 billion was not a decisive factor. Biden administration could have done many things even without them. What about the cluster munition that is sitting in Germany? Hundreds of thousands, not millions of cluster munitions that you cannot use. Why they're not on the front line in Ukraine? And again, it's F-16s. Do you seriously believe that you need 2.5 years to train Ukrainian pilots? Are you kidding me? I always remind people that in the first 6 months of Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union, the United States, which most of the time, until December 11, stayed neutral, supplied Stalin with 360,000 tons of ammunition, weapons, and food. And that was done at a time where the Far East route has yet been developed, and most of this went through Arctic waters that were infested by German submarines, with Luftwaffe dominating the air, 360,000 tons, and you can't organize this kind of delivery today. So everything starts with your strategy. The moment you say Ukraine must win, you provide the resources. But the biggest fear in Washington is not hypothetical use of Russian by Russians of tactical nukes. The fear of Biden administration is a collapse of Russia. Same fear as led Bush 41 back in 1991 to deliver his infamous speech in Kiev. But I can understand him. In 1991, they didn't know what would be the outcome. They used to live in a world where Soviet Union was a factor and collapse. God knows what comes next. Today we know that it's as long as Russian Empire exists, it will be a problem. So it's not just a victory in this war. It must be a defeat of Vladimir Putin and the imperial concept. We have to demonstrate to the Russian public, to my compatriots, that empire is dead. And the only way to do it is to have Ukrainian flag in Sevastopol. You have to kill imperial virus that has been poisoning the minds of Russians for centuries. Unless it's being done, nothing will happen. And the West, led by America, is still contemplating what is the outcome of the war. The Jake Sullivan ingenious plan was to find a compromise based on territorial concessions with admission of the free Ukraine into NATO, some payments from Russian frozen funds. Putin answer, go to hell. He wants to win because Putin's goal is not to get a few pieces of land there. He wants Ukraine to disappear. Again, it's not I'm saying, he has been saying. Why don't you listen to what Vladimir Putin has been saying repeatedly? And his propaganda repeats 24/7. Ukraine as a state doesn't exist. It's a failed state. It's part of Russia. Yeah, a little bit go to Hungary, to Poland. This is not a state. And as he said in his infamous speech in 2007 in Munich, looking straight in the eyes of the leaders of the free world, including Bush 43, and then what he repeated in his ultimatum in December 2021, NATO must go back to 1997 borders. Again, he said it. This is his policy. So what do you expect? And again, to make things even just, it's to feel even more helpless is that every military expert can tell you that set aside nukes, the eastern flank of NATO, that includes now Poland, Baltic nations, 3 Baltic nations, Sweden, Finland, and of course Ukraine, you can add Romania, will crush Russia on the battlefield easily. It's when they say, oh, Russians can enter Tallinn in 3 days. No. You look at the real balance of power. Those are NATO countries. They have NATO weapons. It's not Russians will enter Tallinn, Riga in 3 days. It's Estonians and Finns will enter St. Petersburg in 3 days. So what is standing on the way of decisive defeat of the Russian Empire that was a problem not for decades, for centuries. Sometimes it was called, Soviet Union, but the imperial nature was there. It's absolute, strategic impotence of this administration. And again, it's not just Biden. It's an overall weakness because America somehow represents the laziness, the complacency of the free world. After the end of the Cold War, triumphant victory, nobody wants to fight, and it's a false narrative that we somehow can negotiate our way out of crisis. We're at war, and nothing will change before the change of the regimes in Moscow and Tehran. Let's leave China for a moment aside. But Moscow and Tehran have 2 aggressive regimes that made a war the only justification of their existence. Putin is war for a simple reason. Both politically and economically, he can't go back. He needs war to justify all sacrifices, and also he needs war to keep Russian economy going because it's a war economy.
It's an extraordinary image you make there. It makes me think that if Finnish and Estonian troops entered St. Petersburg, would they be greeted with flowers and bread in the streets? I suspect they might. That's quite
well, this is a good point. Look, I don't think that this is people in big Russian in megapolises are willing to fight. So that's why Putin's strategy was to avoid mass mobilization in Moscow and St. Petersburg. When you look at the structure of Russian troops mobilized and most killed in Ukraine, after Russia lost, I don't know, most of its original army that has been in invading army, so they had to start recruiting soldiers. So they went for jails. So that was the Prigozhin's idea. And also they have been taking relentlessly depleting, depressing regions like Buryatia, Tuva, Chelyabinsk, Kurgan, avoiding Moscow and St. Petersburg. And I think probably other theaters as well. I haven't checked Yekaterinburg, but the idea was to avoid megapolises. Now Putin reached a point where he has to go there, and that may change everything. Because
it's a real
as of
instability, isn't
today,
it?
Russian economy looks decent, though the interest rate is 16%, and the sanctions already biting. There are many ways to evade them. This again, the West has not built sanction regime that could topple Putin regime. They have not threatened the oil trade. 60% of Russian oil goes through the north. So and is being transported by a shadow fleet. There's so many ways you can actually you can invent by imposing taxes on the ships. They have to go through through Danish control channels. The moment you decide you have to win the war, you start looking for creative ways. And again, let's go back to the World War II. I always tell people it's in Casablanca on January 24th, 1943. Roosevelt and Churchill signed a declaration. Of course, Roosevelt pushed it. Churchill was not so sure. And it called for unconditional surrender of Germany, Italy, and Japan. Unconditional surrender at a time where German troops were still at Bank of Volga, stretching all the way to Atlantic Ocean. Japan was still kicking, just there, and even Italy was in the war. But the idea was to avoid any doubts that it would be kind of negotiation, unconditional surrender. I'm not saying you should demand unconditional surrender from Russia, but you should say Ukraine must win, and this victory has three components: liberation, reparation, and justice. And then you provide resources, which are, by the way, in abundance, to support the strategic goal. But when your strategic goal is very ambiguous and you always try to negotiate, then Ukraine will be paying this price in blood. It took so many weeks or months to allow Ukraine. Just recently, they allowed Ukraine to use American and European weapons to actually hit Russian territory. It's just, Ukrainians watched the Russians, loading their guns on the other side of the border, and they couldn't do anything. And hitting Kharkiv 50 kilometers away, and they could only cry because they were not allowed to. Now they got this permission. It's amazing. It's just step by step, drop by drop. What's the point of doing it drop by drop? You could have won this war 2 years ago. Biden could be greatest hero, just it was alongside Roosevelt and Reagan. All you needed is just to give Ukraine weapons that they were, again, another irony, built to fight Russians. They were not built, just to fight Taliban. They were designed, invented, built to fight Russians. Again, Russian invasion of Europe. I always remind people when they say Ukrainians probably, they're not ready for NATO. I'm saying, wait a second, what is NATO? Why the NATO was created in the first place? NATO had only one goal only, not to fight terrorism in Asia or in Africa, but to save free Europe against Russian invasion, Soviet invasion at the time. The battlefield back in the 50s or 60s, potential battlefield was on the River Rhine. Today, Russian invasion is being stopped at River Dnieper. The difference is geographical. The principle is the same. Ukraine is the only European nation that fought the very purpose NATO was built for. How on earth do you have any moral rights to actually to doubt Ukrainians' rights to join NATO? They paid hundreds of thousands of lives, enormous blood price to become NATO. And by the way, they saved your asses. I remember also I was in Poland and there was a little debate there, and one of the former Polish ministers from the former government, he was complaining from Morawiecki government. Again, I understand this reason. This is we made mistakes, and European Union didn't do that and Ukrainian tracks with cheap grain there on the border we have to block because they destroy our agriculture, and it's just a very passionate argument. And I said, look, I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong. I just want to remind you that you had two choices: Ukrainian tracks with this grain that you hate, or Russian tanks on your border. Trust me, you're going to less of it.
One is definitely better than the other. Now, we should really unpack this because the non-supply of weapons, the constantly placing red lines, not on Russia, but on Ukraine and how they use Western weapons, this isn't accidental. This isn't some kind of administrative mistake. It is a strategy, and it seems to be a strategy informed not by, as you say, the mechanics of geopolitics. It's not informed by a concept of deterrence. As was developed in the Cold War, it is governed by what something seems to be escalation management. Do you think Russia has somehow able to put in place some kind of reflexive control over certain elements of the US government? I'm not going to say this is purely a Biden thing because we see people throughout the system potentially having, falling for some form of propaganda. But it seems that Jake Sullivan and advisors like Samuel Charap, some at Rand Corp, and so on, they seem to have internalized Russian nuclear threats and propaganda, and they seem to be manipulated by it. Russia seems to be manipulating US foreign policy in that extent. How has this happened? Do you agree with that idea?
Look, yeah, with all criticism of Biden administration, we should remember that this is not, not just their isolated opinion. You have people on both sides of the aisle, and it's the best illustration of the horseshoe theory in foreign politics. You can stretch line from Jeffrey Sachs to David Sachs, and you could see that is this they from the far left or far right, they all express concerns about human lives. And all of a sudden, I mean, imagine Jeffrey Sachs giving interview to Tucker Carlson. Just, I mean, it beats Kafka and Orwell combined. Yes, because they found this is the common cause now. This is it's they don't want America to play a global role. Again, they disagree on everything else. But all of a sudden they have passion for Putin and for Xi Jinping and for some kind of the world imaginary world where America could not be a world policeman. Um, and again, the price to pay, Ukraine is demonstrating it. And by the way, before was Syria, and you can look at Africa. We don't even have time to discuss it, but it's unmitigated disaster. It's just it is Africa has been taken over by Russians and Chinese. And by the way, this is it's a country with enormous natural resources. The Central Africa, there's several countries there. They have probably the largest deposits of the rare earths that is important for mobile phones for the technology, and it's all being enhanced of Russians and Chinese now. Why? Because America walked away. Because America has no guts to fight back. Yeah, it's that big talk, democracy, but it's talk. Talk wars are cheap. Again, Bashar al-Assad is still there. He's still there, and that's better than any wars. And Taliban is just has moved the country back to medieval time. And Iran, Iran attacked Israel, and it's not that they attacked just overnight. Just it was a clandestine attack and nobody knew about it. No, they announced it, and Biden said don't, and they did it. Now, can you imagine? United States president said don't, and somebody did it. For a second, you think Reagan says don't, and anybody would have lifted a finger? Yeah, somehow I doubt very much. But that's again, it's a recipe for disaster because that's how dictators became so arrogant and emboldened that they crossed the final red line. So Hitler didn't see any difference attacking Poland or Czechoslovakia, and he was genuinely shocked that Britain and France had different opinion. What's the problem? I'm just, I'm doing something on the eastern flank. Why do we care? So we reached a point where we have no other choice but to recognize the fact that, I mean, war means war, and we have to play this global game. And as we said, strategy. We need a strategy, and so far, American political class shows very little. Uh, there's an understanding, but very little political resolve to actually to recognize that America's leadership is paramount for global stability, and choosing between Biden and Trump, which is a likely choice, though I still think that American political life is so unpredictable. I will not be surprised entirely if we don't see either name in the ballot. So again, that's a small chance, but as you see, every day we have something happening in America that by any standards would be grotesque, but it is happening. And unfortunately, this American political show, it's another element of escalation, because escalation is a result of weakness. Strengths never led to escalation. That's history. Deterrence was always the best way to keep dictators at bay. Yes, nobody can deny that there's a risk, which I think very theoretical risk, and we don't have time to go over it. Very theoretical risk of Russians using nukes. But the problem is that, and that's what all these advocates from the right or left ignore, is that the moment you make a concession based on this hypothetical possibility, based on this irrational fear, you have to close the shop. You have to walk away from Europe, because if it works in Ukraine, it will work in Lithuania. And the idea that, oh, we will defend every inch of NATO territory. Okay, don't make me laugh. So it's Ukraine offered you the best opportunity to destroy Russian armies without putting at risk any American lives. If it goes, God forbid, to Lithuania or Estonia, you have, by your treaties, you have to put American soldiers on the front line. Though we all know that 30 years ago, America forced Ukraine to give up its nukes and produce guarantees. Oh, of course, it was a memorandum. It was not exactly, binding. But Ukraine gave up the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world, which was bigger than Britain, France, and Chinese combined, and received guarantees from America and from Russia, of course, that their borders would be intact. Okay, so that's another signal to every other country in the world. You want to protect your borders? Get the nukes.
And I have a million other questions. We didn't even get onto Russian opposition politics, and 100 other questions there. But the last
Maybe
one,
next time. So
next time,
I'm not going anywhere. So we definitely can continue this conversation. Unfortunately, again, it's bottomless.
Um, we still have a problem, though. The US is incrementally giving certain permissions. Yes, you can hit Russian forces on the border at Kharkiv, but not in Sumy, not in other places where they're massing. Fundamentally, we still have at the heart of US foreign policy a figure like Jake Sullivan, who is running around playing whack-a-mole, not strategic, no concept of victory. In fact, he specifically doesn't want Russia to lose. I think this is now quite clear. Yes, we don't want Ukraine to lose. We don't want Russia to lose either. Putin is playing a completely different game. He's playing a win-lose strategy. He has no concept of win-win. So we're at an impasse. Does this mean that we carry on playing this game until Ukraine is attrited, or Russia sort of collapses far more disastrously? Or is there another way, but will it require a figure like Jake Sullivan to be moved aside, or otherwise he may well be putting at risk the re-election of Biden?
Look, I don't think you can expect much from this administration. And Jake Sullivan has the best strategic position, 100 meters away from Oval Office or whatever the distance is, which puts him, in a top position to advise the ailing president, who probably just, can't work. I don't know, just for the period of time required for the United States presidents to be in charge. And we know his advisors. You mentioned Samuel Charab and the others that have very different from ours the view about the world's geopolitics, and the fear of Russia's collapse is a dominant one. I think we're reaching a point where just Ukraine's victory should also include continue. It's Russia's defeat. again, for me, it's synonymous, but still you can say that. And one of the important elements of winning the war is to consider there's to start working on creating a Russian component of the winning coalition. You have people like me, Michael Khodorkovsky, and millions of others that would like to be part of this Free Russia coalition that will fight back, like Free France of de Gaulle. The problem is you have to cross the front line, and you don't have documents. I've been promoting the idea of what I call Russian Taiwan. I use the word Taiwan just to avoid any analogy with the government in exile, just like another country. So arguing that Russians that are willing to say in 5 seconds without stuttering, war is criminal, regime legitimate, Crimea is Ukraine, and signing the relevant declaration, they should be given a chance to cross the line because they immediately became criminals in Russia and they should be able to join us. And that might be the biggest a blow to Putin's war economy because many of Russians who would like to do it, they are just now busy building missiles and drones. And I don't want to be the advocate. I don't want to find excuses for them. But if you offer people no choice, you can hardly blame them. So just imagine that America had an opportunity to offer visas to German scientists in 1942, 1943. Would they have done it? Of course they would have done it. And what's the difference now? We are not at war. That's a difference. We are not at war. No country even recalled ambassadors. Maybe Estonia did once. Not even recalling ambassadors. We say, Putin is illegitimate. Recall ambassadors. You still keep your diplomatic missions, but do something. Show that you are at war. No, we're not at war. And that's why Putin is still there. So we need, just a strategy. And Russian component of the strategy might be a very important one. Because you have to, if you're afraid of Russia's collapse, yeah, fine. So think about the next day. Putin collapses, what happens next? You have to replace the corrupt pyramid. Right? This is the Leviathan of Russian dictatorship. So you need maybe 50,000, maybe more of capable people who can come in. Offer them chance now to leave Russia and to start working with them outside of Russia. You can change things inside. It's a lunacy. It's the idea that things can change from inside. It's just they're so far from reality. It's like Germany 43, 44. Would you expect someone to rise as Hitler? No, they tried in 1944. Didn't work out. And again, it was just coup attempt after successful D-Day invasion, after they realized the war would be over. But even then, it failed. So you have to start thinking creatively about winning the war and replacing Putin regime with the structure, that could offer Russia a chance for the future. And to make Russia an ally of the free world, part of the Euro-Atlantic civilization, opposing China and other dictators. But you need people of different caliber. You need those who just, who worked on global strategy, whether it was FDR administration or Truman or Eisenhower or Kennedy or Reagan. As of today, we're dealing with people that they train to shuffle the papers. Jake Sullivan was a stuffer. Just let's be honest. And Joe Biden, 36 years in the Senate. 36 years in the Senate. So it's all is just how to avoid making decisions. That's how you survive. In the corridors of the Senate. And now you have to make decisions that will influence not just next year or two, not even next decade, maybe next generation. And I think this the recognition of the fact that the future world can be shaped by your decisions now. That's only for people of different caliber to bear.
And of course, we mobilized in the Second World War places like Bletchley Park. And as Peter Pomerantsev has written in his recent book, we actually had multiple radio stations and propaganda units, pumping stuff into Germany to try to shape the narrative and change people's minds. We used satire and we used comedy and we used the German emigre community to help attack
which was, by the
those
way,
Nazi
much
values.
smaller than German immigrant community was minuscule compared to what you have in Russia. It is again, it's the amount of people who already left Russia and those who would be willing to leave Russia if they offered the chance to get any document to settle in the free world. It's in millions. And that might be the deadly blow to Putin's war efforts, because these people are responsible for engineering, computers, handling computers, and also finances. So the people that just that's represent the brains of the country. Just even 100,000 of these specialists taken away, that's already a big blow. Take 500,000, and probably Putin war machine will collapse. Satire is fine, but it's at the time of the war. You need to add something more practical. So just I want to see the plan. Satire could be a supplement, but it's the main dish is still your strategy. It's you need meat, raw meat.
It's been a huge privilege speaking with you. I hope we remain confident that
Absolutely.
despite everything, Ukraine will still prevail.
Yeah, yeah. We have to believe in it, and we will do whatever we can. So, thank you for inviting me. So always happy to share my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you for coming on, and Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава!